Welcome, everyone. Today, we dive deep. We're delving into a pivotal, truly explosive section of Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, specifically Aphorism 11, from Chapter 1, Prejudices of Philosophers. Now, in this passage, Nietzsche launches a characteristically incisive and, yes, provocative critique. His main targets, Immanuel, Kant, and the whole trajectory of German idealism that followed. We'll see him dissect, almost dismantle, Kant's famous notion of synthetic judgments a priori, and the very idea of explaining our cognitive capacities by appealing to so-called faculties. But this critique isn't just destructive. Oh no. It serves as a crucial stepping stone, a launchpad, for Nietzsche to introduce one of his own foundational concepts, perspectivism. The radical idea that the value of a belief might lie not in its absolute, unshakable truth, but in its necessity for life. What he terms the perspectival optics of life. Indeed, this aphorism, it challenges us, profoundly, to consider how philosophy itself might be understood. Perhaps not as a disinterested discovery of timeless truths, but as a human, all too human activity, more akin to invention, perhaps. Think about that. Our exploration today will trace Nietzsche's argument step by step. We'll begin with his sharp assessment of Kant's pride in his philosophical achievements. Then, we'll follow Nietzsche as he widens his critical lens to encompass what he calls the honeymoon of German philosophy, particularly figures like Schelling and its alleged tendency to invent rather than discover. A key moment, a truly memorable one, will be Nietzsche's deployment of Molière's virtus dormitiva analogy, a brilliant way to ridicule explanations based on these faculties. And this sets the stage for his radical reframing of Kant's central epistemological question. Finally, we'll consider Nietzsche's rather biting, almost scathing, assessment of German philosophy's broader cultural impact in Europe. Throughout our discussion, we'll pay close attention to the philosophical methods Nietzsche employs. What's in his toolkit? Well, there's his genealogical approach, digging into the origins of philosophical developments, his powerful use of rhetorical analysis and deconstruction, and, of course, his emerging perspectivism. We'll also touch upon how certain characterizations made by Nietzsche, some of his zingers, might be understood in their historical context, and, importantly, how scholarly interpretation of this very passage has evolved. From those early 20th century emphases on Lebensphilosophie, to later, post-structuralist readings that highlight Nietzsche's deconstruction of philosophical foundations. This section is dense, no doubt about it, but it lays significant groundwork, essential groundwork, for many of Nietzsche's later arguments concerning truth, knowledge, and the very nature of philosophy itself. It challenges us to reconsider not only Kant's legacy, but also the very way we approach philosophical inquiry, potentially transforming our understanding of what philosophy is and what it should be. Nietzsche kicks things off with an observation, a pointed one. He notes a contemporary tendency, a kind of looking away, when it comes to Kant's profound impact, particularly Kant's own estimation of his work. He writes,
"It seems to me that people everywhere these days are at pains to divert attention away from the real influence Kant exerted over German philosophy, and, in particular, wisely to overlook the value he attributed to himself."
This sets a critical tone, doesn't it? Suggesting a kind of willful ignorance, perhaps, or even an anxiety of influence. And Nietzsche immediately hones in on a specific source of Kant's pride.
First and foremost, Kant was proud of his table of categories, and he said with this table in his hands, "This is the hardest thing that ever could have been undertaken on behalf of metaphysics."
Ah, notice that. See how Nietzsche uses Kant's own proclaimed valuation of his work as the initial launch point for his critique. It's a brilliant rhetorical strategy, turning a philosopher's pronouncements against them. Nietzsche doesn't dispute the ambition, not at all. But he quickly pivots, slicing through to what he sees as the core of Kant's self-congratulation and, simultaneously, his self-deception.
But let us be clear about this could have been. He was proud of having discovered a new faculty in humans, the faculty of synthetic judgments, a priori.
Now, for Kant, establishing the possibility of these synthetic a priori judgments, propositions that expand our knowledge, that's the synthetic part, yet are known independently of experience, that's the a priori bit, was absolutely crucial for grounding metaphysics and science. It's worth pausing on this term faculty, or Vermögen in the original German. Beyond just ability, Vermögen also carries connotations of assets, fortune, or power. Think about that. So, Kant's pride in discovering a new Vermögen resonates with acquiring a new form of intellectual capital, doesn't it? A prized possession in the philosophical landscape, which, as Nietzsche implies, fueled a certain kind of philosophical economy. From a psychoanalytic perspective, one might even interpret this intense pride as a significant narcissistic investment. The faculty itself functioning as a reified concept, an intellectual fetish providing a comforting sense of mastery. And Nietzsche's immediate counter? It's stark, brutal, even.
Of course he was deceiving himself here.
This isn't just a cognitive error for Nietzsche. It's a motivated process of self-täuschung, self-deception, driven, he suggests, by intellectual ambition. But this alleged self-deception, according to Nietzsche, it wasn't just a personal quirk. It had significant consequences, ripples, big ones.
But the development and rapid blossoming of German philosophy depended on this pride and on the competitive zeal of the younger generation, who wanted, if possible, to discover something even prouder and, in any event, new faculties.
Here, we see Nietzsche employing a genealogical approach, one that a Foucauldian lens would highlight as an inquiry into power dynamics, the discovery of faculties as a discursive event, establishing new fields of knowledge and, yes, power. He's suggesting that a major philosophical movement was propelled not just by the serene pursuit of truth, but by psychological and social factors. Pride, an effective economy of jubilation, a competitive desire for novelty. This raises a critical question for us, doesn't it? To what extent can the historical or psychological origins of a philosophical idea bear on its validity? Is Nietzsche committing a genetic fallacy here, simply dismissing an idea because of its origins? Or is he pointing to something crucial, something profound, about how philosophical inquiry as a human practice actually proceeds, challenging that age-old ideal of the detached, objective philosopher? What do you think? Nietzsche then returns to Kant's central question and his purported answer. Quote,
"How are synthetic judgments a priori possible?" Kant asked himself, and what really was his answer? By virtue of a faculty, which is to say, enabled by an ability.
Nietzsche finds this explanation almost comically insufficient, dressed up, though it was, in fancy philosophical garb.
Unfortunately, though, not in these few words, but rather so laboriously, reverentially, and with such an extravagance of German frills and profundity, that people failed to hear the comical niaiserie allemande in such an answer.
The comical German niaiserie, or foolishness, and niaiserie suggests a particular kind of simple-mindedness, and unworldliness lies precisely in positing a faculty as an explanation. We should note here that Nietzsche's use of a phrase like niaiserie allemande is a characteristic, if, let's be frank, problematic element of his style. It can be seen as a nationalistic caricature, reflecting his broader, often critical, engagement with German culture, and what he perceived as its pedantry or philosophical woolliness. While such generalizations can be viewed as crude stereotyping today, understanding this within the context of Nietzsche's polemical style helps to situate the attack, though it doesn't necessarily excuse it. For Nietzsche, this niaiserie is precisely what allowed the philosophical community to overlook the vacuity of the explanation. It's merely restating the problem in different terms. It explains nothing. The enthusiasm for Kant's discovery was, in Nietzsche's view, immense. People were ecstatic.
In fact, people were beside themselves with joy over this new faculty, and the jubilation reached its peak when Kant discovered yet another faculty, a moral faculty. Because the Germans were still moral back then, and very remote from realpolitik.
This aside, this jab about German morality and its distance from realpolitik is a characteristic Nietzschean punch. It links philosophical developments to broader cultural and national characteristics, a point we might critically examine for its generalizing tendencies, for sure, while still appreciating the rhetorical force and its challenge to view philosophy in some kind of splendid isolation. It isn't, is it? This period, Nietzsche declares, was
the honeymoon of German philosophy.
It was a time of fervent activity, a real buzz.
All the young theologians of the Tübingen seminary ran off into the bushes. They were all looking for faculties.
This imagery, it evokes a sense of almost naive, unrestrained searching, doesn't it? A philosophical gold rush. And what did they find? Nietzsche's tone here is laced, absolutely dripping with irony.
And what didn't they find in that innocent, abundant, still youthful age of the German spirit, when Romanticism, that malicious fairy, whispered, whistled, and sang, when people did not know how to tell the difference between discovering and inventing?
Nietzsche's personification of Romanticism as a malicious fairy that whispered, whistled, and sang. It's a potent piece of rhetorical deconstruction, isn't it? Suggesting that this philosophical era was seduced by alluring narratives, by enchanting songs, rather than grounded in rigorous discernment. The term Geist here, German spirit, is particularly laden. In the context of German idealism, especially Hegel, Geist is a term of immense weight, of profound significance. Nietzsche's use of it to describe a period of faculty hunting, subtly, brilliantly, mocks the grander metaphysical pretensions often associated with it. And this distinction he draws between discovering and inventing, this is crucial. It suggests that philosophical breakthroughs might actually be creative constructions, aligning philosophy more with art or myth-making than with objective science. A profound meta-philosophical claim, if ever there was one. This characterization, however, can be seen as an oversimplification, a somewhat dismissive portrayal, perhaps, of a complex period in German idealism and Romanticism. It reflects Nietzsche's own position, looking back after its zenith, reacting against what he perceived as its life-detaching obscurities. He singles out Schelling as a prime example.
Above all, a faculty of the supersensible. Schelling christened it intellectual intuition, and thus gratified the heart's desire of his basically piety-craving Germans.
Again, a psychological and cultural explanation is offered for a philosophical development, a piety craving, here, perhaps interpretable as a deep-seated desire for connection to a transcendent, almost paternal authority, a desire fulfilled by the invention of such comforting faculties. Yet, he pulls back from outright moral condemnation of this movement. It's fascinating.
We can do no greater injustice to this whole high-spirited and enthusiastic movement, which was just youthfulness, however boldly it might have clothed itself in grey and hoary concepts, than to take it seriously, or especially to treat it with moral indignation.
It was, in his view, a phase, a product of youthfulness. Not to be judged too harshly, perhaps, but also not to be taken at its own self-serious valuation. A kind of naive, yet potent creative force, even if ultimately misguided. And the narrative arc of the aphorism itself, from Kant's pride through this youthful honeymoon to eventual disillusionment, it frames the philosophical argument as a story, a compelling story, making the critique far more persuasive than a purely abstract one could ever be. This dream, as Nietzsche calls it, eventually faded. All dreams do, don't they?
Enough. We grew up, and now, the dream faded away. There came a time when people scratched their heads. Some still scratch them today.
The awakening brought a critical re-evaluation, a philosophical morning after, and the central figure in this dream, and thus the central figure upon awakening, remains Kant. Always Kant.
There had been dreamers. First and foremost, the old Kant, by virtue of a faculty, he had said, or at least meant. But is that, really, an answer, an explanation, or instead just a repetition of the question?
Notice how this rapid succession of rhetorical questions performs the dismantling of Kant's explanation. He's forcing us, the readers, into a critical stance. It's a performance of critique. And here, Nietzsche introduces his famous analogy, his killer blow, drawing on Molière's Le Malade Imaginaire. When asked why opium induces sleep, the doctor replies, well, listen to this.
By virtue of a faculty, namely the virtus dormitiva, quia est in eo virtus dormitiva, cujus est natura sensus assoupire.
Undash. Because there is in it a dormitive power, whose nature is to lull the senses. This is the heart of Nietzsche's rhetorical deconstruction. To say opium induces sleep because of a sleep-inducing power is a tautology. It explains nothing. Absolutely nothing. Similarly, to say we can make synthetic a priori judgments by virtue of a faculty for doing so is, for Nietzsche, equally empty. Vacuous. This is a classic example of critique via analogy, powerfully exposing what Nietzsche sees as a logical flaw, a tautological or circular explanation. A tautology, essentially, gives the appearance of an explanation, but doesn't actually add new information. It's like saying X happens because of the power of X happening. See, it goes nowhere. Nietzsche's use of Molière is a performative act of ridicule. Quoting in French, then Latin, within a German text, it creates a multi-layered ironic effect. He's using the tools of scholasticism and high culture to deflate philosophical pomposity. The form, a quote from comedy, enacts the content. Kant's explanation is, to Nietzsche, utterly comical. Now, we should pause here. Let's be fair and consider an alternative interpretation of Kant. Is Nietzsche being entirely fair? Is he playing by the rules? A Kantian might argue that faculty language, while perhaps unfortunately open to such ridicule, is really just shorthand for a complex transcendental argument. Kant, they'd say, isn't offering an empirical psychological explanation of how these judgments occur in the brain.
He's exploring the conditions for the possibility of experience and knowledge as we have them. His faculties, understanding, sensibility, reason, are meant to designate fundamental structures of cognition, necessary for any coherent experience whatsoever. From this viewpoint, Nietzsche's Molière analogy, while rhetorically brilliant, devastatingly funny even, might miss the transcendental nature of Kant's project. Indeed, a deconstructionist reading might focus on how Nietzsche exposes the mien as an unstable placeholder, an empty signifier, revealing the lococentric desire for a firm ground that Kant seeks and Nietzsche relentlessly undermines. Moreover, Nietzsche's skepticism towards such faculties as explanatory devices echoes earlier empiricist critiques. Think of Locke or Hume, their critiques of innate ideas or posited powers of the mind that are not derived from experience and fail to offer genuine causal explanations. So, what do you think? Does the charge of tautology stick, even when we consider the transcendental interpretation of Kant's aims? This is a good point for reflection. How much does the specific language a philosopher uses, like faculty, open them up to critiques that might not fully engage with the deeper structures of their thought? And how do different interpretive traditions, say a post-Kantian versus a genealogical reading, assess this very confrontation? It's fascinating. Nietzsche, however, is utterly convinced. Such answers, he insists, belong in comedy. Period. He then makes a decisive move, proposing a fundamental shift in the inquiry itself.
But answers like this belong in comedy, and the time has finally come to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, with another question, why is the belief in such judgments necessary?
This is a profound reorientation, a classic genealogical move. What makes it genealogical? Well, instead of taking Kant's question at face value and attempting to answer it on its own terms, Nietzsche shifts the focus. He steps back. Genealogy, in this sense, often involves asking about the conditions of emergence of a concept or question, or inquiring into the function or value it serves, rather than its objective truth. He's asking about the conditions of emergence and, crucially, the value of this belief for life. Nietzsche immediately elaborates on the implication of his new question, and the implications are vast.
To realize, in other words, that such judgments must be believed true for the purpose of preserving beings of our type, which is why these judgments could, of course, still be false.
This is a radical claim, explosive. The necessity of a belief for survival, for the preservation of beings of our type, raison unsere art, is divorced entirely from its truth value. A belief can be essential for life, absolutely vital, yet utterly false. This introduces a pragmatic, life-centered criterion for evaluating beliefs, a core element of Nietzsche's perspectivism. This articulates a key tenet. Some beliefs are true or valid, not in an absolute, godlike sense, but because they are necessary for a particular form of life, for a particular perspective. They have truth for life's sake. It's a direct frontal assault on truth correspondence theories. It suggests philosophy's worth might lie in its life-serving function, even if its claims are, from some abstract viewpoint, false. We might note here, however, that the concept of our type remains somewhat undefined by Nietzsche in this passage. It could potentially become a new unquestioned assumption, susceptible to its own genealogical inquiry. and that the assertion of necessity is a strong claim, made here with more persuasive force than extensive proof. Important caveats. He pushes this point further with increasing bluntness. He doesn't pull his punches.
Or, to be blunt, basic and clearer still, synthetic judgments a priori do not have to be possible at all. We have no right to them, and in our mouths they are nothing but false judgments.
This is a strong assertion, a real gauntlet thrown down. The right to them is denied, and they are flatly declared false judgments. It's worth noting that Nietzsche doesn't offer a detailed proof of their falsity here. Rather, he asserts it as a consequence of his reframing. One might ask, is this assertion itself a foreground belief for Nietzsche's own perspective? Or does it aspire to a different order of truth? This highlights a potential tension in Nietzsche's own method, critiquing dogmatism while making pretty authoritative pronouncements himself. The emphasis for him is on their functional role.
It is only the belief in their truth that is necessary as a foreground belief and piece of visual evidence belonging to the perspectival optics of life.
This concept of perspectival optics of life is absolutely key. The German Vordergrunds-Glaube und Augenschein, where Augenschein literally means eye shine or eye appearance, connects directly to that ancient philosophical problem of appearance versus reality. Our fundamental beliefs, those synthetic judgments a priori, that Kant thought grounded objective knowledge, are for Nietzsche more like necessary illusions, lenses, goggles we must wear to view the world, just to survive and function. They are foreground beliefs, surface-level appearances, crucial for our perspective, not windows onto reality as it is, in itself. This is a direct challenge, a radical one, to the traditional philosophical quest for absolute, objective truth. And it dissolves the strict boundaries we like to draw between epistemology and psychology, even physiology. This notion, by the way, strongly prefigures ideas found in pragmatism, particularly in thinkers like William James, who also emphasized the will to believe, and the idea that the truth or value of an idea is related to its practical consequences, its role in lived experience, how it helps us navigate the world. The resonances are striking. All right, let's take a moment to teach the method of perspectivism more explicitly here. What is it? Perspectivism, in Nietzsche's philosophy, is the theory that all knowledge and judgment are inevitably conditioned. Conditioned by what? By the individual's or group's specific perspective, which is shaped by psychological, physiological, cultural, and historical factors. And, crucially, by the will to power and the conditions necessary for life. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean anything goes, that all opinions are equal. Not at all. But it does mean that there is no God's eye view, no absolute, unmediated access to truth. Instead, there are multiple perspectives, and some of these may be more life-affirming or power-enhancing than others. Here's a useful exercise. Consider a belief you hold strongly, something you're really sure about. Got one? Okay, first, try to articulate why you believe it to be true. What are your reasons? Then, try to imagine from Nietzsche's standpoint. What life-preserving or life-enhancing function might this belief serve, even if it were not absolutely true? This can be psychologically unsettling, I know. It challenges our epistemic security, our comfort, but it helps us grasp the radical shift Nietzsche is advocating. Really grasp it. Finally, Nietzsche turns his gaze to the broader cultural effect of the German philosophy. He asks, with that characteristic biting irony of his,
And, finally, to recall the enormous effect that the German philosophy, its right to these quotation marks is, I hope, understood, has had all over Europe. A certain virtus dormitiva has undoubtedly had a role.
The scare quotes around Die deutsche Philosophie. See those? That's a self-referential nod to his own textual strategy. He's highlighting the constructed, interpretive nature of such labels, implicitly questioning their stability, signaling his skepticism, his ironic distance.
And the virtus dormitiva returns, the sleep-inducing power. But now, it's applied not just to Kant's specific explanation, but to the overall impact of this entire philosophical tradition. Wow! Who were the beneficiaries of this sleep-inducing power?
Nietzsche lists them, and it's quite the rogues gallery.
The noble idlers, the virtuous, the mystics, artists, three-quarter Christians, and political obscurantists of all nations were all delighted to have, thanks to German philosophy, an antidote to the still overpowering sensualism that was spilling over into this century from the previous one. In short, sensus assoupire.
To lull the senses. This list is, of course, deeply pejorative and a sweeping generalization. It reflects Nietzsche's disdain for what he saw as various forms of escapism or life-denying moralities. When he says the virtuous, for example, he likely means it in his critical sense of conventional, herd morality, not genuine strength of character. So, German philosophy, in Nietzsche's scathing assessment, served as a kind of opiate, a spiritual drug. A Frankfurt School critic, or one using a sociology of knowledge framework, might see this as an analysis of its ideological function, pacifying, preventing critical engagement with social reality by fulfilling certain social or psychological functions for particular groups. It offered a way to dull the senses, to retreat from the perceived harshness of a world increasingly understood through empirical and materialist lenses. This is a powerful socio-cultural critique, isn't it? Portraying a major intellectual movement as, in part, a reactive force, a sophisticated tranquilizer. And Nietzsche, by diagnosing this, implicitly positions his own philosophy as an awakening force, a stimulant, a call to arms. So, what have we seen in this dense, provocative, and utterly brilliant aphorism? Nietzsche begins with a focused critique of Kant's pride. His pride in discovering synthetic judgments a priori, and his method of explaining them by virtue of a faculty, of a magen that signifies so much more than mere capacity. This, for Nietzsche, is a comical niaiserie, a tautology pure and simple, akin to Molière's doctor explaining opium's effects via its virtus dormitiva. This critique then broadens. It expands to encompass the entire honeymoon of German idealism, which Nietzsche characterizes as a period of youthful inventing rather than discovering. Driven, he claims, by psychological needs like piety craving and romantic enthusiasm, personified as that malicious fairy, all under the grand banner of Geist. The crucial turning point, the real hinge of the argument, is Nietzsche's proposal to rephrase Kant's question. Instead of asking, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible? He demands, yes, demands, we ask, why is the belief in such judgments necessary? This is a signature genealogical move. And his answer? It introduces the very core of his perspectivism. Such judgments are necessary as foreground beliefs, Vordergrundsglaube and Augenschein, for the preservation of beings of our type, even if they are, as he boldly asserts, false judgments. Truth is thus subordinated to life, to perspective. The concept of faculty evolves from a specific Kantian term to a symbol
of uncritical, tautological explanation. While German philosophy itself, wrapped in those dismissive scare quotes, is ultimately characterized by its virtus dormitiva, its sleep-inducing effect, serving as an antidote to sensualism for a certain class of European intellectual and cultural figures. Throughout this passage, Nietzsche masterfully employs several philosophical methods. We've seen his genealogical critique, tracing philosophical ideas to their psychological, affective, and historical origins, often using Kant's own words against him, or diagnosing motivations like pride or
Piety craving.
His rhetorical analysis is stunningly evident in that devastating Molière analogy, and his stylistic choices, where tools like irony, pointed imagery, and national characterization, like miserie au monde, become substantive parts of his argument. They are the argument, in many ways. And most significantly, he lays the groundwork, the very foundation, for his perspectivism, challenging the traditional notion of absolute truth in favor of life-conditional beliefs. This aphorism doesn't just critique Kant, it challenges traditional boundaries between epistemology, psychology, and cultural critique. It forces us to ask meta-philosophical questions about the nature and purpose of philosophy itself. What is it for? What can it do? As we move forward, we will see Nietzsche develop these themes much further. His critique of past philosophers is not an end in itself, not just intellectual sport. It's a necessary clearing of the ground, a demolition project for his own monumental project, the
Revaluation of all values.
The ideas introduced here, the suspicion of traditional epistemology, the focus on life preservation, the concept of perspectival truth, and the unmasking of philosophy's effective economy, are foundational, absolutely foundational. So, for next time, I want you to consider these questions. Chew on them. First, if Nietzsche is correct that some of our most fundamental beliefs might be false, yet necessary for life, what are the implications for the traditional philosophical pursuit of truth? Can philosophy still aim for truth, or must it adopt a different goal entirely? Second, Nietzsche critiques Kant's faculty as a tautological explanation. Fair enough. But can Nietzsche's own explanatory concepts, such as the will to power or the perspectival optics of life, escape a similar charge of being overly general or potentially tautological themselves? How might Nietzsche defend them? Third, considering Nietzsche's emphasis on the invention of faculties and the perspectival optics of life, how does this aphorism challenge the traditional distinction we make between philosophy and art, or philosophy and literature? What does it suggest about the role of rhetoric and style in philosophical argumentation itself? This will help us bridge today's discussion with Nietzsche's broader philosophical ambitions. So, give those some thought. And with that, we conclude our deep dive into this pivotal, truly mind-bending aphorism. If this exploration of Nietzsche's critique and his concept of perspectivism has offered you new insights or clarified some complex ideas, and I sincerely hope it has, I encourage you to like this video and share it with fellow students of philosophy, or indeed anyone you think might benefit from this discussion. To continue this philosophical journey with us, as we unravel further texts and thinkers, please do subscribe to the channel and perhaps turn on notifications so you don't miss our future explorations. We've got much more to cover. Finally, the philosophical conversation truly comes alive through dialogue. It's not a monologue. So, I'd be very interested to read your thoughts and interpretations in the comments below. Perhaps on Nietzsche's charge against Kant, or the implications of perspectivism for the pursuit of truth, or maybe your initial answers to the questions we just posed. Your engagement helps build a thoughtful community around these incredibly important ideas. Thank you for your attention.